Muy buenos días a todos y todas. Vamos a proyectar la presentación ahora.
Morning to all. We're going to start with the presentation now.
Muy buenos días a todo el mundo.
Morning to all,
Gracias por su
and thank you so much for your presence.
Lámina, por favor.
Next slide, please.
Por favor, se noten que hay
There is interpretation system from English, Spanish to English. You can choose your language on the bottom there on your screen. Please, next slide. We have an excellent group of panelists. I'm going to tell you, I'm very excited to introduce them to you. We have Catalina Vargas, who is the director in Colombia from CARE. Catalina previously worked as a regional consultant and at CARE at the regional level. She's an expert in gender, and she's worked for more than 12 years in the monetary sector and development sector with different organizations led by women, promoting equality, gender equality, and trying to eradicate poverty. Also, we have Lorena Berenjano, who is responsible for CARE Colombia. That means that she passed all the money assessment. She's worked for more than 8 years for different human social organizations trying to look for solutions to guarantee human rights in the sector of human rights in areas of crisis. She has several academic evidence in terms of resilience of kids and teens in context of armed conflict. We also have Fanny Santana, who is responsible for CAR Colombia. She's a sociologist, and she has experience in social development and monetary development, and also design and research, social research. She has been one of the facilitators of social processes and in the elaboration of technical reports, academic reports, and also she's been a teacher at the university. We also have Angelica Rivers, who is a psychologist of Lingo. Angelica, she's a psychologist from the University of Simón Bolívar, and she has a master's degree for different evaluations and direction of projects. She has experience in public health, and also she is the regional representative of the Americas. Next slide, please. I would like to add that thank you for the support of the United States through the agency of USA. So thanks to them, we have this project. Next slide. We're going to give you a screenshot of the webinar. It's going to last 19 minutes, and then we're going to have an introduction by Catalina. She's going to give you a background of the reality in Colombia and the project. Then Fanny is going to talk about the results of the investigation, the research, and then I am going to have a panel with Lorena and Angelica about the observations of this project. Please, the chat box, you introduce yourself, and also the Q&A box in case you have any questions. And please feel free to write your questions in English or Spanish. We're recording this session in both languages, so I kindly ask you for the panelists to a little bit slower so the interpreter can capture everything that you're saying. Right, please? Catalina, I'll give you the floor. Thank you so much, Holly, and good morning to all. So I would like to share the experience and the work of the implementation of this project. We can please go to the next slide. We're going to here first one of the women who were part of this project, so you can have um, an idea, you can hear her own words. Good morning, Yela. Good morning, Miss Laura. We're showing you what I'm doing now with the cash that you're offering me in the program Mujer Migrante, Migrant Woman. I'm making some empanadas with the help of my daughter. We go out to the streets to sell them. And this is the way that we are getting some extra income to address our needs. Thank you so much to all those people that I don't know and that are making this possible. Thank you for giving us that help and making us know that we are valuable and that our work is valuable and that we can actually make progress and move forward. So we're offering these empanadas too, that we make every day to increase our income. Thank you so much for your great support in this project for the migrant woman in Venezuela. You're offering this great help, and I have the privilege to have this space to thank you and be one of the many women chosen for this project. Blessings, and thank you for your help.
Podemos pasar a la siguiente. Bueno,
Next
este
slide, please.
testimonio
Well, that's a testimony that we wanted to present you, which is this is more or less what we're going to talk about. To start, I would like to give you some context about Colombia, and it's important to highlight the differences, the different vulnerability elements in the territory. Not only where the project took place, but also the country itself. Currently, Colombia is one of the countries at the global level with most forced migration due to the internal conflict that is been in the country for several decades. So more than 7.4 million people that has been displaced from their houses or territory because of restrictions, also forced displacement, etc. This context that seems could, could have been solved. Unfortunately, from 2020, it's getting worse. That means we're living a setback of what it could have been the progress in terms of conflict. This territory was only populated by Colombian population, and now there is a wave of Venezuelans that are arriving, and this is important because since 2017 we're receiving the migrant population from Venezuela, and currently we're talking about 2.5 million people that have migrated to Colombia, and they're here to stay. And people are still getting out of Venezuela, so these figures are going to increase. These are the registered figures, but there's a percentage known that we're not taking into account because these are people that are migrating via not regulatory accesses, like by bus or things like that. And these are people who don't have the necessary paperwork to enter Colombia. And in conflict areas where you only found Colombian population, you also find Venezuelans here that are being victims of the conflicts that are taking place in this territory. And we're going to talk about this a little bit more further on. And if you add the COVID-19 pandemic, which is one of the main impacts, was informal trade. And we know that a great number of people who are migrating are using the informal economy as the only source of income so they can have some livelihood. So these three contexts or these elements or vulnerability is where we found a lot of people involved in the country right now, and the impact of the crisis is not the same to everybody. The impact, there's a greater impact to women and teens, and this is supported by all the researches and analysis that we have conducted, and it has proven, they have proven that teens and girls, there's a high impact
y de todos los
based
demás
on the violence, gender-based violence, and a lot of other elements related to the protection that is lacking.
de la firma del acuerdo de paz en Colombia.
After the signature of the peace agreement in Colombia, there was an absence of the government actors.
Por los grupos ilegales y esto nos enfrenta a una situación de debilidad
This is that we're facing a weakness in the government, especially in the context that we're talking, what we're referring. That we're going to talk about is took place in the Department of Santander, which is the one that is bordering, with the border with Venezuela, especially in the sub-region of Catatumbo in Ocaña. And this is a very particular area in Colombia because it's been affected, historically affected by the conflict, because there's a production area, coca leaf production and cocaine production, and there's a presence of armed forces. And this brings a lot of outcomes or results, which is the high percentages of violence, gender-based violence, specifically in this territory. And also the context analysis, we have determined the emotional and physical assault are the ones that are caused in women and teens. And also the perpetrators of this violence were mostly men that are part of the illegal group of population. And this is, obviously there's a fear in women and fear, they fear to denounce their perpetrator. And because of this practice of violence are something common. And there's also a lack of data recollection. There's no statistics that show us the exact impact of the violence based on gender, for example, for groups LGBTQI. So, and this is because of stigmatization and that we have in this society that is mainly machista and patriarchal. So this is a very sensitive context with Colombian population that has been displaced, where some Venezuelan migrants are also arriving in search of a better life, and they're all together in this very sensitive context. This is a project very important that started in October 2020 and it ended in May 2022, and it was funded by USAID in Colombia, and it was looking to show how the CVA could have a high impact in terms of protection to support the people affected by gender-based violence. The approach of CARE Colombia, we're working closely to prevent, mitigate, and also assist the victims. So it was very important to us to have this funding so we could know how to integrate the CPAs, the programming for the attendant, for the assistance, and how this could improve the humanitarian response for women and teens victims of this violence. This project initially started in Tibu, but due to the sensitive context of the armed forces being there, we had to move to Ocaña, where there was a more safer area, not only for us that we were helping with the project, but also for the people from Porpodingo. This project also counted with the support of the Commission and the WRC, because they gave us the possibility of the data analysis and recollection to improve this, to achieve our goal with Corpo Dico, who is our partner in Colombia, that they had already the benefit that they were in the territory before us, and also with the leader and care as a leader, because we were talking about CBA and GBP, and this is a model that has been designed in the last 5 years, especially in Ecuador, and it's been escalated to different countries, and it shows the added value from this gender based on the gender. Now I would like to give the floor to Fanny Santana, that is going to talk about the key findings of this project. Thank you so much, Catalina. Good morning to all. I am going to talk to you about the model of the projects and the reference process. So this included all the cases and all the CVA, and it was based
contra la violencia por razón de género de WRC, IRC y Mercy Corps. ¿Quiénes fueron los participantes en este
who were the
programa?
participants of this program?
Mujeres mayores de 18
Men and women older than 18 years old with sexual orientation, different sexual orientation, also disability people, and mostly were women, displaced women, migrant women, and women of the community, the host community. How we did the inclusion of the people to this program. Socio Corporinco was in charge of the awareness with the local partners, the local government, with the aim of that they could identify women affected by the GBE. But the most important part was that it wasn't just at the institutional level. Corpodinco also conducted some awareness campaigns in the main plaza, in the market, in different places, and close to the places where there are sexual sex employees. And this way, they conducted these campaigns of awareness to sensibilize the people in this area. This way, we did a focus survey initially. The scores of this survey were so high that it wasn't going to allow us to classify the participants into groups. That's why the professional of Corpodinco with the coordinator, they did an analysis case by case to be able to establish who were going to receive the case management and exclusively, and who were going to receive the CBA linked to the case management. Also, there was some cash transfer to for protection for the survivals, for the intervention or study group. These cash transfers that had a value of 370, and they could receive 3. The services provided were psychological assistance, guidance, workshop, and access to local services provided by Corpodingo, who was the actor on site. And also, we also talked to the police station on site, and there were some counseling on the migration, and also the people who wanted to receive some health reproductive assistance that was provided. So all these services were provided, and we updated services on a regular basis. Then the methodology, this research had mixed methods, because we had qualitative research and also quantitative methods, because we apply a line-based, and we monitor what the survivors were doing with the cash transfer. How did they use it for their own protection, choosing different methods. And we did this through the post-distribution survey. In the cognitive assessment, through a sample, a selected sample, we chose more than 60 participants. These 60 participants, 40 of them were part of the intervention for the study group, which is the group that received the cash transfer, and 20 of the control group who received the case management only. Why we did this sampling? Because that way we could everybody could have participation, displaced women, Venezuelan women, also Colombian women, also people with different sexual identity and disability people. So they all could take part of this program. Now we're going to talk about the categories and the analysis. The analysis categories were psychological violence, economic, physical, and sexual, and also all the economic impact, which is employment, etc. The well-being was well-being, health in general, and services, access to services, sanitary assistance, and legal assistance. Now we're going to talk about the cash transfer and the use of cash. So first of all, the provider of this the financial service provider was 83% came from the participant, 83% of the participants mentioned that this provider was friendly, accessible, and there was one in their neighborhood, and this was easy for them to access to the money. The amount was 370,000 pesos, and 65% of the participants mentioned that this cash transfer was enough. As we see, the group of the cash group, they use the cash mostly investing it in a micro or mini company business. And this was very interesting in terms of protection. They also use the cash to cover their basic needs, their kids' needs, like, for example, to keep them in school, to pay out debts, medicine, to pay the rent and transport, etc. Most of the survivors mentioned that they themselves, they were controlling the cash, and a few of them, they said that they consulted with families, with relatives, to see what they were going to do with the money. Now we're going to see the economical agency. As we saw before, the cash for protection was useful to reduce their stress associated to poverty, to strengthen their business capacity, sometimes so they can stay away from the perpetrator, and sometimes to meet their basic needs. Some improvements were improving in the life of the survivors. 23% that received the cash received also, they said that also received money in the last 30 days. This is before participating in the program. And this was thanks to the use of the cash that they received. 83% of the participants informed that they could save some money. These were huge changes in the survivors' lives. In the group that didn't receive the cash, they said that their economical situation hasn't changed. And the group with cash, they mentioned that this was a huge change. So the cash actually changed their lives hugely because they were able to start a small business. The group with cash reported they felt more independent, And this was also because of the cash they received and the investments that they did with it. Then the participants, they say that they boost change because they use this cash
seguras, huir de una relación
to keep themselves safe, they stay away from an
asociarse con otras
unhealthy partner, and also to associate themselves with other survivors so they can organize a micro business and keep it afloat. In terms of empowerment, both groups, they said that they both saw themselves very empowered in terms of knowledge on GBV, and as well as the agencies and entities that could support them. And also they said that they know now how to react or act facing a situation of violence. And also their children, the parents and the siblings of the survivors, they also said that they felt a lot safer, and then they could access different services like health services that they couldn't or didn't have access before because they didn't have the resources. We're going to talk about the repercussion of the GBV. There was a reduction in both groups in terms of psychological, economical, and sexual and physical violence. The group with cash, 22%, and the one with no cash was 13%. In the scale of self-guilt, the one with cash had 35% reduced, and the other group was 23%. So both of them had they had a significant statistic increase in the scores of the attitude or gender attitude. Most of the survivors felt more secure. The group with cash, they had a greater sense of safety, but in general, the CBA provided the survivors more strategies so they can be able to protect themselves and allow them to adapt also the cash transfers so they can be able to meet their needs according to how they so fit. I would like to give some examples. Some women started selling some hot beverages in public spaces, or used to beg, or used to trade sex for money. They said that their economy was boosted thanks to the cash because they managed to start a small business. And these women, they said that they felt a lot more safe because now they could take a bus or pay for transport from their homes to work and avoid just walking on the streets, which is very violent, especially to people in the LGBTQ. The survivors who had suffered some IPV and violence, they were more independent. They felt more economically independent, and they had enough money to meet their basic needs. And in some cases, they were even able to rent another place so they can be far away from their aggressor. And also they had money to pay for legal services, for example. Next slide, please. This is the wellness assessment, and both groups, they presented a less level of stress, especially the group with the cash, because the cash provided a lot more confidence to them. So for them, it was like a protection strategy. And so, as I said before, they were able to invest in something and then they have an additional income. And also, both of them had more hope and more autonomy and they felt greater well-being. Then the psychological help and the workshop, they contribute to increase their self-esteem and the resilience, and they reduce the feeling of being isolated. This is very important because when we conducted a workshop, they identified that there were other women that also went through the same experiences as they had. So they encouraged themselves, and this way they didn't feel so alone, and they created this group, very strong group.
Bueno, vamos a ver entonces las recomendaciones.
The recommendation for this program, we designed different processes, operational processes, and they were very strong. However, they're susceptible. There's always room to improve. Why? Because many survivors said that we had to take into account the scope of the program, and also this depends on the offer in terms of protection services are there in the area. The scope of the program, many participants mentioned that it was important to include their children and siblings and family in general, so they can understand that the GBV it's not a good thing. So we can just break this concept or this knowledge that is passed from generation and generation. And some cases were very complex, and the professionals of Corpo Dingo had a huge workload, and they mentioned that it was important to give a personalized assistance to each survivor. So there were a lot of displacement, migration, and some of the cases were more difficult than others. In terms of the delivery mechanisms, most of the participants said that it would be interesting to try other mechanisms of delivery, like mobile cash or the ATMs. What's the value of the transference? So it was established that it was 300 and 700,000 pesos, but some of them said that it wasn't enough. It was 370,000 pesos. And also to adapt that amount of the transfer according to the case. For example, if one of the survivors had more people that were dependent on her, then, and also depending on the specifications of the case, and this cash transfer has to be enough so she can pay for transport and the school of her kids. Next slide, please.
Bueno, y esta diapositiva es muy bonita.
This slide is very nice because it says in their voices, and it's a testimony of the women. One it was a migrant and one was Colombian. Because of the violence, I felt bad, like a little thing. And thanks to the workshop, I had a boost of self-esteem, and I had strength to defend myself. The Venezuelan women, she said, thanks to the cash transfer, you can have more income. So I don't depend on a man anymore. I depended on him because he was the one who worked, and I was the one who stayed at home. So when I realized that I was alone, that I didn't have any income, I had 2 kids, then that just blocked me to be able to move forward. And now, thanks to the program, I was managed to overcome this. Now I can have my own things. I can work to make the best out of my children's life. So thank you so much. This was the results, the most important results of the program. I am going to give the floor to the next panelist.
Muy interesante los resultados.
Thank you, Fanny. Very interesting, the results. And I have the honor to be the moderator here. I'm going to start talking about the subject, why it's important, why this project is important, why is space important, and to share this observation, because a few years back, the 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 word the PT the CPA, or there were not a lot of discussions before, and the case management comprehensive also related to GBD.
Es más para
So
ofrecerle
let's
un
say
abordaje
that this is just to address this issue in a broader way, in the case related like just see the good things about the case management and the good things about CBA, and this is the result of this. And also to have some data and strong research so we can facilitate the use of this methodology in the future. I am going to give the floor to Lorena and Angelica. If you could turn your cameras on, please.
Angélica, ok, super. Podemos quitar la presentación por un ratito. La primera pregunta es para ti,
The first question is for you, Angelica. So from your point of view, Corpolinco was the organization that implemented the case management, right? So this is a work that is very difficult and it's very comprehensive in a area of Colombia that Cata said that, I mean, it's very difficult. So from your point of view, from the organization, which were the main elements for this project to be a success? Angelica? Good morning, Holly. Thank you so much for allowing us to be part of this important webinar. I think that the case management is composed by essential elements in terms of designing and implementing the project. So we had to take into account the articulation of the different institutions, to know which actors do we have in the municipality, to activate the routes, for example, also to identify the activation routes on each case, then the legal assistance and the psychosocial assistance. So this is a very important component for the case management and to achieve also to tackle the violence against women. It was important to include the CVA into this process. So the case management is a individual practice that it's based on the needs, subjective needs and individual needs of each of the women who were assisted, taking into account their own particularities, which is the support network, their context, their condition, or migratory status. It's not the same to have the same offer for a migrant woman than one that we have for a Colombian woman. In Colombia, obviously, foreign migrant women, they don't have as much assistance or knowledge about the services we have available or in place for them. So we have to see exactly each of the context of each woman. Okay, thank you so much, Angelica. I love your approach. I love this approach that to understand their needs and background and everything of the survivals. Lorena, I am going to change the question for you because Karen had a different role, different than for Puerto. I would like to understand from your point of view, the current Colombia, which were these elements for the project to be successful. Well, good morning to all. It's a pleasure to be here with you. The role of CARE in this research or in this project was mainly just to be in charge of the data collection for the analysis and also to do the follow-up of each case that was done by Corporinco. So the research was very important because for because we open this space to analyze the information that we cannot always analyze, especially in projects. We have the case management, but we don't always have the opportunity to see exactly what happened to each case. So here specifically, we were able to do it and also to do the follow-up of the cases. Why it was successful? Because we could escalate this case management. So this allowed us to escalate a process that we had already started a few years back in different countries. And also, since we had two groups, one case study and the other one, and this is not always possible in all the projects. So this is a complete added value because we had real evidence of what's going on with the projects that we implement, specifically in this case with the CBAs. Another important thing was it was a joint effort with Corpodingo, but also with the WRIC, which they told us how to research this topic. One thing is how do you investigate or research? So we had two groups, one with a study and one non-study, so we can make the difference and we can see the impact of the CVA. And lastly, for us, it was very valuable that before we started researching, we started this pre-process done by Corpodinco with women. That means they had enough time to get to know the women and then just build the trust. So once we start with the research, it was a lot easier for us to start a conversation with them. And then and also it was easier to conduct the survey, to do the whole bio with them. So that was already done because of the pre-work that Corpodinco done before we arrived. Thank you, Lauren. So it's very interesting to see how we can see the good use of data to make decisions linked to what Angelica was saying. So we're focusing on the survival and also in a very strongly, very exclusively focusing on the survival. Corpodingo is an organization that has more than 25 years working in the subject of protection and also working for a lot of years in CVA. So Corpodingo had already experience on this, but this is the first time that you really hunted this, right? And like Hata said, it's an area very complicated in Colombia. So I'm sure that there were a few risks, especially you as a group in Corpodinco and also for the potential participant. So could you please tell us about those risks that do you identify and how did you manage to mitigate them in the end? Well, first of all, we all know the area of Catatumbo in Ocaña is one of the municipalities that hosts displaced population, and it was also hit by the armed conflict, where the women we assisted there or helped there, they had one particularity, which is they were double affected, or in some cases a triple affection, because taking into account the GBP, they were also impacted by the armed conflict, and some of them they were also affected by the weather conditions and the conditions where they lived that were high risk areas or high risk in the this municipio. So this is one of the things that we address. One of the risks in terms of armed forces are imminent within this context. So we kept the confidentiality of even the name of the project. We didn't disseminate or discuss what was the project about, that it included CVAs. We also implemented some actions to identify risk areas for the team. So the women could just go to places where it was safer for them to look for assistance or help or services. In some cases, the perpetrators could also take some vengeance with the women.
La manera más confidencial posible.
So we try to keep all the information and identity of the project and the women as confidential as possible. And also we make them aware of the risks that the women can face when receiving the CVAs. So but the work that we did, we tried to make the place a lot, a little bit safer for all the women. And we make sure that our team were on site so they can identify the safe areas. And within the implementation of the CVA programs and the case management, all the design and preparation phase, it's very important to achieve, mitigate the risk and to be able to address on a to implement certain actions that are needed according to the situation. So this contribute to the safety, security of the participants as well to the professional team that we had in place. And on the other hand, the collaboration of the institutions in the area was very important. All the institutions, the government entities, the public ministry, as well as the police stations, it was important that they knew what we were doing in the area. And this was key also, so we could actually execute and implement this project. Thank you, Angelica. What I understood from that, that is very important that to do this risk analysis, I mean, we have to do it first to know exactly what are the risks that we can face. And also, I like how you mentioned these risks of one survival has to be based on their her context, and also just see also the risk that she suffers after receiving the CVA. And thank you so much for answering some of the questions that the participants have asked. Lorena, the project, it wasn't only the implementation, it was very important, obviously. It's very important that we can provide these services to survivals, but it also had an idea of research. This was the goal, to share and to learn, and also to create some base with different institutions and local, international, and national institutions. So please tell us a little bit more about the actions that you implemented in Colombia to achieve this part of the project. As you said, the project was not only the implementation, but also the research on the CVA and the case management, the case history. And top, one of the things that it has in its favor, there were some people already team in the ground, because we really need to know what it was going on in the implementation of the project. And this way, I mean, the knowledge, we could transfer this knowledge to different organizations in Colombia. We had 2 workshops in Colombia with 15 different organizations, humanitarian organizations that already work with CVA. Some of them also work with case management, and it was good because we could have some knowledge before the CVA based on in GBV. And this is not a process that it has ended. So the idea is that we can also influence other organizations. And in Colombia, for example, we need to keep on learning the impact on this CVA can have in this process. This is the research is not over. There is a lot more questions to answer, but it's a start, and it's also an invitation for other organizations that if they can they want to share uh, their knowledge on CBA and GBV, it's more than welcome. And also, we need to learn, because as we know, Angelica was mentioning, there was risks, but the important thing is to realize which are the risks and how can we address the risks. And for that, we need to learn to do how to do it. And maybe we can do, maybe we can do more, and then we have to learn also how to do it
Sí,
better,
me encanta que
or
haces
what's the
hincapié
best way
en
to
que
do it. See,
las
yes,
participantes si quieren también usar esta
I really like what you said, and if the
metodología,
participants
pero
want
hablando un
to
poco
use this
más
methodology,
Angélica, también si
it will be
quieres
good. Angelica, I would like to talk
agregar a esta
to you
parte
about
del
this. If you would
proyecto.
like to add something
Sí,
about the project.
esta parte del enfoque de acción sin
Yes,
daño
this
es
action
fundamental.
approach is
Es claro que para el
key,
equipo
and it's clear
de
that for the
trabajo
working team,
tuvieron en cuenta algo muy
they
importante y
took
es
into
saber
account something very
en qué
important, which is to
momento y
know
cuándo era oportuno
when
entregar la
when
transferencia
it was good to deliver
La
this
transferencia
the cash transfer. The cash transfer was a multi-purpose thing that satisfied the needs,
como más apremiante de las mujeres.
the most
Pero
basic
¿de qué
needs of
va?
those
El
women.
acompañamiento de la gestión de casos y esto es lo
And
importante, entregar un PTM cuando hay
it was important to deliver a CVA
supervisión guiada y orientada
and
y
to have
entender
this orientation, guided orientation,
cuáles son sus
so to
necesidades,
help
cuáles son
women
sus
to
riesgos
so they
y
understand what
qué
are the risks
necesitan
and
para
what
superar
are
las
their
violencias.
basic needs and
Entonces,
what do they
en este
need to
momento, el
overcome the
proceso de gestión de
violence.
casos
So
estaba
the
centrado en
the
empoderar a las
management, the case
mujeres
management,
para
it looked for to
requerir
empower women
la transferencia monetaria con todo el
before
fin
they
de que
receive
fuera un
the
cargo con
cash
propósito y se
transfer,
utilizara para lo que
even
realmente
though the
era
cash transfer was a
en la
multi-purpose
recuperación
element,
emocional
and she was going to use it
parte
to
de los
recover
procesos en
herself
cuanto a lo que
emotionally.
necesitara económicamente para acceder a servicios,
So the
a
cash transfer was
atención
important
en algunos casos,
for them to access different services
en
to meet
en la
basically
gestión de
their
casos,
needs.
poder orientar a las mujeres y que
There was
recibieran
also
adecuadamente, pues
it was also our aim
asesorado
to
y
guide
asesorado.
women
Entonces,
and also to
ofrecer un
make
seguimiento y
awareness
acompañamiento
among
individual
women,
de cada
and that's why
situación
we did
y de casos que recibieron
some
transferencias monetarias,
individual,
al igual de los
we
casos que
assess
no
each case
recibieron
separately
transferencias
with
monetarias
the
también,
cases that receive cash transfer
la
and
consecuencia
with the survivors who didn't receive the cash
del no recibir pues
transfer.
el dinero. Pero algo muy importante para la acción sin daño
Something
es
very important for the
identificar los
action without harm
riesgos
was
que
to
pueden ser
identify the risks that the
consecuencia
women
del
have
PTM
when
y
she
ser
received the CVA.
un medio o para
So
el
we cannot
agresor
make
de
that
aumentar más
because the CVA can be a reason why the perpetrator causes more harm to the women, or maybe the CVA could be a risk within the context that where the women is, where the women are. For example, it can be in a context of armed forces. So we consider all these elements, and we even consider where these women could go and collect their money in a safe area. Thank you, Angeli. Very, very important to talk about the importance of the survivors being able to decide on the cash transfer. So it could be a cash transfer under protection, but it was the women who decided, which there was a question from the colleagues, but I think you already answered the question that it was based on the action plan of the professionals with survivors, and it was the women who decided what she needed the most. What Angelica mentioned about the risk analysis, in the chat, you can see a matrix that it can be helpful to analyze these risks within different contexts. Now, I am going to read some of the questions that I can have here from the participants, and I think one question that is very important is related to the attention routes. And how was the analysis for you to decide in these procedures, decide on the routes of assistance for the survivals? I'm not sure if you want to talk about this. Angelica, maybe you want to start?
Sí, es que leí en el chat una pregunta frente a las
Yes, I read
dificultades que tuvieron
one question on the chat on the difficulties that we had in the project. And I think the activation of the attention groups, when we arrive in Ocaña, we have to take into account the context. Ocaña is a context patriarchal area where there's a norm of sanction for violence. Sorry, there's a violence is something normal. And this is one of the things that it was difficult to activate the roots, especially in institutions, legal institutions like the police stations or public forces agencies. It was one of the difficulties we encountered during the project, that but that we managed to create this net articulation network with these agencies. When we see violence based on gender, there's different elements that we need to take into account for the activation of roots. One activation of roots, which is the health root, that we have to provide the service for the health and reproductive sexual health. We, then this empowers women to decide on their body, and in terms of family and reproduction, family planning and reproduction, and this is very important in terms of activation. And what we need to include in the humanitarian or assistance or health services. Another important route was the protection route, and the last one is the justice route. So we have to take into account that these routes are fundamental for the management and assistance of the cases, so we can activate them in an efficient and a prompt manner when the women need it. Especially in a context like Catacumbo, where the risk of women facing violence is huge, and many women, they don't want to denounce because they don't want to report, because they don't want to repercussions. And some of their partners belong to these armed groups. But the fact that one woman doesn't want to access to one justice route, we cannot deny the right in the case management. So we open all three routes for all women, but these have to be taken into account when we do the case management, because maybe one woman is afraid that she's insecure, she's uncertain, and she doesn't know what's going on at the beginning, and for her, violence is something that she deserves or that she has to go through because of her conditions or whatever. But it could be that this woman decides to access this justice route after doing all this awareness. So that's why the pre-work, what we do before, it's very important. There are some women that who think that this violence is not something normal because it's something that she's always seen in her life. So for her, violent conducts are normal, and somehow we can change that perception in women. So it's very important at the beginning to integrate all women in the case management and to change their view in terms of in terms of how they perceive violence.
y yo debo empezar a intervenir para hacer un cambio o una transformación de la situación de las mujeres. Cambio.
Gracias, Angélica. Tenemos varias preguntas muy
We have
interesantes.
several questions.
Quiero preguntar a
I would like to
Lorena,
ask
sobre,
Lorena
también la articulación. Hay varias preguntas de
about the
trabajo,
articulation. There's a few
articulación con otras
questions
entidades a nivel
about the work with other
gobierno de
organizations, the
Colombia.
government, Colombia.
Por tu
I would
perspectiva,
like
¿cómo fue este
I would
proceso?
like to start with you. How was this process? And maybe what observations do you have?
Esta es una pregunta muy interesante.
Well, this is a very important question because as Angelica was saying,
Contexto particular.
this area is very particular, so it wasn't very easy from the start to generate this relationship. We had to do the awareness first, and specifically with the Secretariat of Women, with the family police, with the prosecutor, with the police, etc., but also with other organizations that were on site. So this actually allowed all these relationships that we built. It allowed that our work was more sustainable on site. So Karen Coppolinco was not all the time in Ocaña. And in the case management, it's important that the different organizations could support our case and support the survivors. Because once we exit the area, it's important that that process is embedded on site in the territory. That's why we highlight the importance of the whole awareness campaigns.
Y volver, digamos, sobre eso todo el tiempo para que las rutas realmente sean efectivas.
And this way, with the awareness campaigns, it makes all the routes that we were talking about before possible. There's one more thing that I want to ask you, Angelica, which is the involvement of men in the process. You mentioned the possibility of a risk, which is the perpetrators. I want to ask you, how could you involve in a positive way men? Or what are the challenges or the changes that you would like to do in the future? Well, I've always thought that we have to include men in this process. We have worked a lot of time to work with the victims and not with the person who stands from on the other side. So Corporalinco integrates the family of the victim, taking into account the kids, for example, that they had to witness the violence, how their mothers were abused. In this opportunity, what we did was to link in this process, to include children and also some men who were participating in the process, especially during the awareness campaign at the municipality level. Also, there were some campaigns against violence aimed to men. So we explained to them that there were also protectors of women and of their rights, etc. And this is a way that we had the opportunity to work with different men and for them to acknowledge that there's a gender problem and that some conducts are not okay, that are perceived as okay in their context. So the idea is to include men so we can actually create some awareness on the rights of women and to eliminate the patriarchal image or character of the place. Obviously, we have to take into account all the cases that are reported, but there's a lot of violence that is invisible in this context, and these are invisible because of the GBV, the distrust in the institutions, and also the lack of faith that these women have, that they don't think they're going to get out of the situation they're in. I think the violence that affect most to women is the economical violence, because they're dependent on the men, and this is one of the factors that influence a lot in women, and so they can conquer the fear of getting out of this relationship. And I think one of the key, so this was a key, so the women could make changes to, so they can have access to education. Um, they could access on different courses, or also or different workshop to empower them so they know how to start a business, for example. I think this also strengthens a lot the process to be able to integrate or involve women so that they can finish their primary or secondary education. This also helps women, to empower women. You can start there with education and empowerment of women. Thank you. Lorena, CARE as an organization that is focused on gender, how, uh, if you could do some improvements to this project, which are the methodologies or different ways that you will use to include women to prevent violence, the GBV, that you would like to add, for example?
Vale, sí. En este momento recuerdo un proyecto en
Right
el
now, I
que
remember a
el
project
interés también era trabajar principalmente con
where
hombres.
we were very interested to work with
Acompañaban, por ejemplo, a
men
mujeres migrantes en las
to
rutas
accompany migrant
de
women, for
mujeres
example,
caminantes que venían en
especially the migrants who
y
walk,
este
that were on
proyecto era
transit.
interesante en el sentido en que
And
nos
this project
permitía
was interesting
a los
because
hombres
it
sobre
allowed
todo
us to talk
de
to
Voucher de
men
crianza,
about, for
sobre
example, how they raise their
colegios
kids, and also in terms of sexual and reproductive rights,
Entonces,
and also about their rights based on gender.
hombres en estos
So
procesos
it's important to include men in this process, especially in terms of GBV,
tiene una autoestima
because if the women has a high self-esteem,
demás,
it's
es importante
empowered,
que también sus
and he has
entornos
participated in the workshop, it's important that
proteger.
her
Totalmente necesario trabajar con
her house, the people around her are also aligned with
vivimos
her.
un estado con una estructura patriarcal y una estructura
And this
machista
man comes from a very machista and patriarchal structure from very young age, and that's why it's important to do all this awareness with men and women both.
Gracias, Lorena. Y pensando un
Thank you,
poco
Lorena. And thinking a little bit more about the challenges that Fanny was mentioning, like the time of the project, for example, to add these awareness campaigns, it takes a while, right, to achieve results. I'm going to read some of the questions that are a little bit specific, but I'm going to ask these questions to you, Angelica, because you were on ground, in the ground. But also, WRC also mentioned that they're going to share the standards practices also, and you will have the information to see how it was the attention roots assistance and what were the procedures. But Angelica, there's one question about the case management, about how many sessions there were, what was the goal, and what were the most, the greatest challenges. And there's also a question about the age of the survival. I'm not sure if you can just give us a snapshot of they were and talk about a little bit about the demographic?
Sí, claro que sí, Holly.
Sure,
Bueno,
Holly.
en primer lugar, las mujeres que participaron
Women who
en el
participate
proyecto fueron
in the
solo
project
mujeres
were only
de
women
18
older
años,
than 18
adultas,
years old. They were
de
adults.
18 años en adelante.
So from
Sin
18,
embargo,
they were
esto no
18
quiere
years old
decir
or older.
que
However,
el
this
proyecto
doesn't
no
mean
pueda
that
vincular
the
a
process
mujeres menores de
cannot include minors, for
18 años,
example,
teniendo en
like
cuenta de que
taking into
podemos
account
encontrar
that we
en
can
el contexto mujeres o
we can
niñas,
find women
adolescentes
or kids or
emancipadas,
teens that are
con hijos
independent
de
already,
16 a
with
17
kids
años.
already.
El sistema de FETI en Colombia para las niñas migrantes con
In
cédula
Colombia,
migrante,
with
pues permite
migrant
el
girls
cálculo de algunas
with
diferencias
ID,
generacionales.
we can include these
Entonces,
children
tuvo en cuenta
for the
mujeres menores de
CPA. We
18
didn't take
años,
into account women
esto
who are
no significa
minors,
que de pronto si
well,
alguien quiere
younger
vincular
than 18 years old, but if
de
someone
15 a
wants to
17 años,
include
teniendo en cuenta los contextos
teens from 15
de
to
género que
17
se
years
presentan
old,
y
taking
los que
into
hay
account the
niñas emancipadas
GE,
de 15 a 17 años,
maybe we
pues
can
se puede
also
hacer.
include
La
this
importancia es poder llevar a cabo
because
la gestión de caso y el
the
acompañamiento
importance is to be able to do the case management so we can review and,
monetaria en este tipo
and
de
establish the
proyectos.
CVA in this type of
Recuerda,
systems.
Holly, perdón, es que
Also,
muchas como preguntas a la
Holly,
vez para
there
poder
there were
responder.
a few questions at the same time.
La pregunta fue sobre las
The question was
sesiones, ¿verdad? Y
about the
más o
sessions.
menos, y cómo
How
fue
many
un poco
sessions,
el
more or less,
proceso
did you
en
conduct it, or how was the process,
your
more or less? How did you
proceso.
selected the women?
Por mi experiencia
Well, from my
en salud
experience
pública y con el
in
Ministerio
health,
de Salud de
in
Colombia,
public health and the government of
nos toma
Colombia,
tiempo
we
para
normally
educación, sensibilización
we work
y
in
pues
terms of
capacitaciones.
education, awareness, and health.
Siempre decimos que cuando queremos
And we
hacer este
always
tipo
say
de
that when we want to
sensibilizaciones,
do
siempre
awareness
los dejamos con el fin de
campaigns, we
dejar un mensaje
do
allí
it with the aim
que
of
pueda
leaving a
la participación
message
toma o no
and
deja y
where the
dejar como una
participants can take
interpretación.
it or not,
Pero
but
cuando
there's an
queremos
echo
tener un
there.
proceso
But
de
when we want
conciencia,
to do
de educación,
an
de transformación
education
y
a program
sensibilización
or
real,
transformation or real awareness
requerimos
facing one specific
una intervención
fact,
más
then
profunda
we need to have
frente
an
a los
in-depth
procesos. Entonces, por
participation
esta razón, las mujeres,
in these
todas las
processes.
mujeres
So that's why all the women
participaron en
received
citas individuales,
different
en
in the
varias citas
one
individuales,
face
más
to
unos
face
talleres de sensibilización
visits.
que duraban entre
Also,
2
they
y
had
2
some awareness
horas, más
workshop
o
that was
menos
between
cada
2 to
uno
3
de los
hours,
puntos
more or less
educativos que
each
se
of the
tocaron,
process
siempre haciendo énfasis
that were
la
conducted on
prevención de las
with
violencias de
each
género, la
women to
identificación de
prevent
grupos, el acceso
GBV,
a
the
derechos.
identification of roots, the access
Pienso que
to
este
different
fue
rights.
un trabajo clave
So I
para
think
lograr
it
la
was a key
transformación
work to achieve
en
a
las mujeres
transformation in women.
y los procesos
And
individuales
the
pues permitían
individual
que a
process
nivel
allowed us,
psicológico las mujeres pudieran
allow
empezar
women psychologically so they can
básicamente un
feel
proceso de
they
sanación
can
o
they
recuperación
can they can heal
emocional,
themselves
porque
emotionally.
pues hay que tener en cuenta
So, and
todas
for
estas
that, we have to take
situaciones
into account all of the affections, psychological
las
affections
violencias de
that they
género,
suffer
todas estas secuelas
based of
psicológicas
the
que tener
GBV and all the
mujeres
traumas that these women
posiblemente
suffer or
en
have,
su niñez.
especially
Con
when
todo
these
esto,
are
pues
also
aunque
traumas
el
they suffer
proyecto
from
terminó, no
young age.
significa que
And
las
when the
mujeres
program ended, it doesn't mean
que quedaran con
that
alguna
the
situación de
women
riesgo o
who were still at
que
a,
necesitaban
in a
un poco más de
risky
intervención,
situation, the
pues
women who
esto
needed a
fue
little bit more
remisión
intervention.
con otras
So we
recomendaciones
did some
institucionales presentes
remission with
en Ocaña
other
para que pudieran seguir
institutions
su
that
proceso
were
y
present
estabilización
in
psicológica
Ocaña so they
o
could
pues
do the
posteriormente
follow-up.
la comisaría de
Yeah,
familia en casos
that
de
is
mujeres
just
que
giving
necesitaran
them some
intervención.
psychological
Sí, entonces
assistance or
la
maybe
idea
some
es
protection.
pues
The idea
poder abordar
was
las
to be
violencias de
able
género de una manera
uh,
integral
to
porque
address GBV in a
eh,
holistic or integral
cada
way,
una de las dimensiones
taking
de
into account
este
different dimensions.
y esto pienso que ayudó mucho a que las
And I
mujeres
think
pudieran
this help
empoderarse,
will
que
help a lot to
el
empower
efectivo
women.
lo utilizaran pues
And the
como
cash
vimos en los
also that
resultados que
they
nos dio
use it
Holly
as
en
we
forma
saw in the
de recibido
results
de caso.
was a multi-purpose cash, and women were able to use it to overcome the difficulties in their lives. I'm not sure if there's any other question pending there. I'm going to give you some breathing time, and I'm going to give you the last question to both of you. The objective of that work is to improve the lives of women, the survival. Okay, the women who have survived the GBV, and it was a process that took a long time, and there was a lot of lessons learned. And I hope that the people who were participating in this are participating in this webinar, they can use this approach within your own context. But we know that we're going to learn something about this project, and we obviously expect this program to be better next time. Lorena, I'll start with you. How would you improve the project so you will have a greater impact on the survivals? So if you will have a magic wand, if you can design another project, what would you do different to improve it?
Bueno, Joli, si tuviera una varita mágica, digamos que
I will have a
fortalecería
magic wand.
los
I think I will
procesos
strengthen
de
the
prevención
awareness
de
process,
situaciones
which I think they were very
y
important.
pues el tiempo de antelación de la
And
investigación
also
fue muy
before
importante
the research, the
para
time
generar
invested there was very important.
recursos
So
para
we could
recolectar esta
have
información.
all these
Algo
tools
que yo le incluiría
for the
es
data collection.
precisamente el trabajo con hombres, que es algo de lo que hemos
Something
hablado
that
mucho
I will
durante la
include was
conversación, para
would
poder
be the work
tener
with
un
men,
impacto a
so
largo
we can have
plazo
a greater
de
impact
procesos,
and
además de
for a
las estrategias
in
para las
long
soluciones
term.
monetarias. Yo incluiría un proceso de
And in
seguimiento
terms of
mayor de hombres
CVA,
y
I will
también
include an
fortalecer
awareness
relaciones
process
abiertas con
with men and
territorios
different organizations that are present
en
in
el campo de
the
defensa
area
en
that
caso
work
de
with
que
women.
los
Because,
guardacorpónicos
for
armados
example, if CARE or
no estén
Copodingo are no longer
es
there
importante
present, then it's
fortalecer
important to
los
leave
territorios
some
desequilibrados de
capacities
mujeres
embedded,
afectadas
installed in the
por
area,
violencias basadas en género
so
puedan
they can help the
tener esas
women
rutas de
who,
atención.
who are
Entonces, yo
staying
diría
there,
que
and so they can have access to
estos
the
son los
different
principales en la gestión de
services.
crisis, como lo hemos
So
venido
to
trabajando para
strengthen
fortalecer
the
el
case
proceso
management, but as
de
well to
las
strengthen the
víctimas
awareness, education, information processes,
a
uh,
entidades y
and
también
also to work with different organizations and work with men specifically. There was one
de pronto para las
question
personas que no son de Colombia sobre el monto de la
also
transformación
on the
digital.
amount of
Como
the
mujeres lo comentamos,
TVA.
digamos que por regulaciones del
Some
gobierno
it was regulated by the government, and they only could allocate 370,000
lo que implica
pesos, which is like $97,
entregas
which
a una misma persona.
implies to do different deliveries to the same person.
De la
So if we
transformación
cannot make a difference with the amount, maybe we can review how the quantity or the number of a cash transfer, I mean, change that. Maybe it can have a greater impact.
Es decir,
And
de
also,
muy
maybe we
fuerte
can
el uso del
strengthen
dinero, porque sí es
also
cierto que la
to
justicia
teach
financiera
women how to use
hay
this
que gastarlo
money
mucho
just
con
so they can decide wisely on what to spend in. So most women invested to start a business, for example. So they use the free cash transfer to strengthen one business that they had, and
en temas de negocios, de finanzas,
but maybe we can also
entonces creo
empower
que
them with
con eso
different with other
ayudar
knowledge, type of knowledge like
a
entrepreneurial knowledge, so they know how to boost their business. So this is also very important. These are actually different levels that you mentioned. Angelica, I'm not sure if you want to add something. I think Lorena has mentioned everything. I agree with everything she said. I think if we could improve the next project, I think that the time of the project is key, very important. So we can evolve different life standards, living standards in women, and also the involvement of different government entities is also very important. at the beginning of the project, the government entities, they saw us with a little bit of caution, but then afterwards, we had a very good welcoming for us, and the public officers were very responsive.
en Ocaña. Pienso que esto es muy importante. Y el tiempo.
I think this is very important, the collaboration of the local authorities.
Poder replantear para que estas mujeres que inician
And
este
I think
proceso
the women who start this process,
en un proceso de
it's
estabilización
important that they can
algo para resaltar del
they can
proyecto y
continue
se realizó
the process with a group of women that they create.
la inclusión que se realizó de mujeres migrantes y mujeres
Also, it was important to include migrant
la
women
comunidad acogida
and the
de
hosting
la zona
community,
de
women
Ocaña.
of the hosting
Entonces
community in
también nos va a
Ocaña.
prevenir
I think this
la
also helps
xenofobia
to
que se puede
prevent the xenophobia that can be created.
pues Colombia
I think Colombia
es un país que
is
está
a
afectado por
country
muchas
that is
crisis
affected by
y que
different
tenemos
social crises, and we have
que
different
producen
problems
por las violencias de género y
that
además de esto
create more
tenemos mujeres en condiciones
GDP.
de
We
pobreza
also have women in
muy
extreme
altas que
poverty and very
en este
vulnerable that
proceso
they can also
de proyectos.
could also be included in
Por
this type of
último,
projects. And lastly,
pienso que
I think
la inclusión de mujeres
that the inclusion of women,
de manera diversa también
LGBTQ
hace
women,
parte del
is
proyecto poder
also
integrar
very important.
a ellas
I think it's important to include them, to acknowledge them from their condition
y cómo se
or from their
identifican como
orientation, how they identify
además
themselves as
de
women.
pues que se vea la inclusión del enfoque de género
So
dentro del
I think it's
proyecto
important to
y
include
que
the
no
perspective of
estamos
gender in the
trabajando desde
project, so we can acknowledge
género
women
y no
from
desde
her
orientación
identity
sexual.
and not from her sexual condition.
Bueno, ¿qué puedo decir? Pero les agradezco
Well,
muchísimo
thank you
por
so
sus
much
aportes y también
for
a los y las
your
participantes por
insights and
muchas
also for the
preguntas, ¿verdad? Creo que
participants
hemos
for
tenido
all
una
your
conversación
questions. We
muy
had
robusta.
a very
Pues
interesting
en el
conversation.
momento ahí que
And at the
nosotros de
moment,
parte de CAP vamos
from
a estar
CALP,
compartiendo la
we're
grabación
going to share
y también si
the
ustedes no han
recording
podido
of this event
ver
in case you were not
el
able
formulario
to
de
attend
ahí
today.
está
And if you were not able to watch the
con gusto
webinar
les
in Ecuador,
compartiremos
it's also
algunos
available
pequeños
online.
como
You can see both.
despertando un poco sus interés en el tema
Uh,
para que se puedan
I
empezar
hope
a elaborar,
that we
adaptar
managed
su
to
contenido
share
pues
some knowledge with
ahí.
you
Bueno,
today
mil
so you can
gracias por
apply
su
this
atención.
knowledge within your context. Thank you so much for attending this webinar, and we're going to be in touch.
Adiós.
Bye bye.
Muchas gracias.
Bye, Odi. Thank you. Bye.